talking about the biggest stories that matter to you the most. Breaking news, John Calipari is finalizing a 5-year deal to become the Arkansas Razorbacks' next head coach, covering college sports like no one else. The biggest guests in sports. We now welcome in Hall of Famer Jim Calhoun.
Such a pride I had, I came to connect.
The legend, Tim Tebow joins us.
We'll run it back. I like it.
The legend, Herschel Walker. Welcome in, everybody. Sunday night edition, maybe Monday night edition. We will see of the Torres Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Torres. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's having a great day. And we have ourselves a little bit of a historic moment here on the Torres Pod. Let me go ahead and explain, okay? So I am actually just full transparency. I told you on Thursday's show, I have taken one last little break before we start to ramp up for football. I think we'll be basically going live every single day during football season. But before we left, I went ahead, and this is where the history comes in. We have recorded my official 12-team college football playoff picks and predictions. So what we're going to do on this show, go through all 12 teams that I have in this year's college football playoff. Behind the scenes, I've been prepping, doing my homework, doing whatever. I'm going to give you my 12-team bracket, 1 through 12, who ends up where, and then we're going to go game by game, and I'm going to give you my preseason national championship pick. This is going to be fun. 12-team playoff. It's a completely different world. I think you'll see how different college football is going to be once we get started. Before we do, quick reminder, make sure everybody is subscribed to the Torres Sports Podcast. As I said, we got some really exciting stuff for football season planned. You can obviously subscribe on Apple or Spotify, YouTube. Make sure that you're subscribed. Make sure that you put on notifications so you know when we go live. You know when we post clips. It is a crazy time, but it is a busy time. Also, as always, make sure you're following on social media at Aaron_Torres on Twitter, at Aaron Torres Pod on Instagram, and at Aaron Torres Pod on TikTok. The TikTok account is blowing up. Appreciate everybody's support. With that said, there is no more time to waste. It is a glorious time of year and a glorious episode. So let's not waste any more time and let's get to the topic of the day. And the topic of the day, as you listen to this, it's probably about mid-August at this point, and we are giving our official 12-team college football playoff picks. Now, I want to be clear. We recorded this a few days before I left for vacation. So if something crazy happened, I'm just going to put it out there. I can't be held accountable. You know, if Ryan Day throws off half of his team, in mid-August, the day before we go live, I can't account for that. If whatever, if Sherrone Moore gets whatever, if Sark does this, like, the bottom line is that this is who I have in my 12-team playoff, but I feel pretty good that barring some crazy injury, that this will not change over the course of the next couple weeks. So my official 12-team playoff. Now, it's worth noting, before we get to the 12 teams, just want to make sure everybody remembers what this 12-team playoff is going to look like once it begins in December. 12 teams are in. You know that. Reminder and remember, because this is important as to how the bracket is going to look. 5 teams get automatic bids as conference champions. It's the 5 highest ranked conference champions. We assume it's going to be the SEC, the Big Ten, the ACC, the Big 12, and one group of 5 team. So one group of 5 team will be in this playoff. You're going to see who it is. One will not be like the other. And then it's worth noting, those top 4 teams, those 4 conference champions, all get first-round buys. So it's not necessarily the 4 best teams by the end of the year. It's not necessarily the 4 highest-ranked teams by the end of the year. If Georgia and Alabama go into the SEC championship game undefeated and the Big 12 champ has 3 losses, it doesn't matter who wins and who loses that SEC championship game. The loser cannot move past that Big 12 champ. By the way, Clemson, they could lose to Georgia by 100 on that opening Saturday of college football. If they win the ACC championship If Georgia does not win the SEC championship, Clemson will be ranked ahead of Georgia. So again, I don't know if the system is perfect. We'll find out in mid-December whether we actually like this format or not. But with that said, let's get to my 12-team playoff, my picks, my predictions, who I like, and the order. Let's start with my number one overall seed, to the surprise of probably nobody. It is the SEC champion. It's the Georgia Bulldogs. Now, why is it no surprise? Well, one, Georgia is the preseason favorite at every sports book that I have seen to win the national championship. Even going back to last year, they obviously got left out of the playoff after losing to Alabama in the SEC title game. But you go back and look, odds makers said that had Georgia been in that playoff, they would have been picked to win it and been favored over everybody in that field, including Michigan, including Alabama, etc. So Georgia's my number one seed, and the reason why is pretty straightforward. This might be, as crazy as it sounds, the most complete team that Kirby Smart has had at Georgia. That sounds crazy, and it's not perfect there. We've talked about the off-the-field issues. But between the white lines, whatever happens off the field has never affected this program. And at the same time, as I said, as complete of a team as Kirby Smart has had. We always think about that defense, the talent on that side of the ball. You know that Georgia had the number 5 total offense last year, led by Carson Beck, the presumptive likely number 1 pick in the 2025 NFL draft. This was a team that scored more points and put up more yards than Ole Miss, Texas, all sorts of schools last year. Well, most of the marquee players are back on offense. They had Trevor Etienne, the transfer from Florida. And listen, the defense isn't perfect, but compared to everybody else, there's still caviar problems, right? Because I've heard this narrative now that, oh, Georgia doesn't have the depth and the dudes on the defensive line like they used to. That may be true. They've still got better dudes on the defensive line than just about everybody. So Georgia, to me, is the best team. I will say what I find interesting about this season, with no divisions in the SEC, the schedule does get tougher. No Vandy, no South Carolina. Those are the two teams that would have been picked to finish that would have been picked to finish at the bottom of the old SEC East. They are no longer on the schedule. You have to play at Bama, at Texas, at Ole Miss. So this is not a team that I believe will be undefeated at the end of the regular season. That's not a knock. It's just a reality. But the good news is they get back to that SEC championship game. They're not losing enough where they're not in Atlanta. And then they get back to Atlanta. I believe once they get there, revenge will be on their mind from last year. Georgia wins the SEC. They are my number 1 seed. My number 2 seed, it is the Big Ten champion. And how about this? The first time ever Big Ten champion, it's the Oregon Ducks, okay? And so when I look at Oregon, what I see is I believe they're actually, in my opinion, the most complete team in the Big Ten this year. First of all, still feels weird. Oregon, yes, is in the Big Ten. If they go to the Big Ten championship game, they are going to Indianapolis. But this is the most complete team in the league to me. Dillon Gabriel is elite. Dillon Gabriel had so much success at UCF, at Oklahoma. He now comes to Oregon. You have a great offensive line. Dan Lanning has recruited a ton of talent on the defensive front. And I just don't see any real obvious weaknesses with this team. Even in Ohio State, questions about the O-line, questions about Will Howard. I don't see that with Oregon. Now, what's interesting about Oregon, they have a relatively tough schedule for a first-year member of the Big Ten. They do host Ohio State. They do go to Michigan. And so there's a scenario like Georgia where I think they could lose a game during the regular season. But you put them on a neutral field against Ohio State. I feel good about how they match up physically, even if in that game, obviously Ohio State would have the home field advantage playing in Indianapolis. So to me, Oregon, as I said, it sounds crazy. I don't really see a significant weakness on this team. Again, Dan Lanning has really stocked this roster with elite upper-level talent. The Oregon Ducks are my number 2 seed in the 2024-25 college football playoff. Number 3 seed, remember, top 4 seeds are conference champions. It's the ACC champion, This one might surprise you guys. I have the Miami Hurricanes, that's right, the U, baby, as the number 3 overall seed as the ACC champ. Again, I'm not saying they're the third best team in college football, but those top 4 seeds go to conference champions, and you look at what Mario Cristobal has done. There is no doubt that he has upgraded the talent in this conference. Funny, I've been talking to people all across college sports over the last couple of weeks. I think even people at Florida State, even people at Clemson kind of acknowledge Miami is the most talented roster in the ACC. They had Cam Ward from Washington State at quarterback, 3,700 yards passing, 25 touchdowns last season. They had Damian Martinez, 1,000-yard rusher. The O-line is going to be one of the best in the country. That is Mario Cristobal's area of strength. Francis Mauioga, a true freshman last year, started all 13 games. That is like a cornerstone NFL top 10 type pick. And then defensive side of the ball, they got dudes everywhere. And so you look at this team and you look at how the schedule breaks for them. They don't play Clemson. They get Florida State at home. And again, in this new era, it's about what are you doing in conference play. Like I think there's a scenario they could even lose to Florida in the opening week. Remember, they play in the Swamp in week 1, but that doesn't matter. And so I like Miami. The one thing I will say, I know what everyone's going to say, Mario Cristobal, you can't trust him in big games and big moments. Okay, that's fair, but here's the counter to that. I understand he's had some really clunky losses. Last year, Georgia Tech, all they had to do is take a knee. He decides, I want to run the ball to prove a point. Fumble. Georgia Tech ends up recovering it and winning. As crazy as it sounds, that's not the first time that happened to him. But Mario Cristobal also, for all the criticism, his last 3 years at Oregon, 2 Pac-12 titles, 3 Pac-12 championship games. So the idea that this guy is incapable of building a team good enough to win a power conference, it's not true. It doesn't jive. Now, you get him on the field with teams with equal talent, maybe the X's and O's start to show themselves a little bit. But I have Miami, ACC champion, number 3 seed. Number 4 seed, Big 12 champion. And this one's interesting. The Big 12, you could go a lot of different directions. I am going to go with the Utah Utes, straight from the Pac-12 to the Big 12. They come in and win this league. Now, look, Big 12, wide open, okay? Oklahoma State's going to be really good. I'm curious about them. Arizona has a chance to be really good, but their schedule is insane. They play all the best teams in that league. Kansas and Kansas State can both be good. The one thing, well, really the 2 things that I know about Utah are as follows. One, they are one of the most consistent programs in college football. Not too high, not too low. They're kind of the opposite of the Mario Cristobal blueprint, right? They don't recruit at the highest level, but they never beat themselves. They never beat mistakes. You go back, they never make mistakes. You go back to that win over Florida last year to open the season. That was just about out-executing Florida and waiting for Florida to shoot themselves in the foot. So you have that, but what you also have, don't forget, Cam Rising was the quarterback of this team when they went to back-to-back Rose Bowls in the 2021 and 2022 seasons. He unfortunately gets hurt at the Rose Bowl against Penn State. I was actually at that game. It was, awful. Doesn't play at all last year, and Utah is down to their third string quarterback and still managed to win 8 games. Well, he's back. The lines are great. I think Utah is the Big 12 champion. All right, let's get to the number 5 team in the college football playoff. This is the first at-large team that we are adding to the field. It is the Big 10 runners-up, the Ohio State University and the Ohio State Buckeyes. Listen, I have been critical of Ryan Day. I'm not going to pretend that I have not been. But at the same time, what I would also acknowledge, there is so much talent on this roster, they're just not going to lose a lot of games. And one thing, you could criticize Ryan Day for whatever you want, and I've criticized him for a lot. He doesn't ever lose games to bad teams or teams that he's not supposed to. So there's never going to be a scenario where he takes a bad loss to a Purdue or an Indiana or a whoever. And those teams I'm not even saying are on the schedule. Yes, he struggled against Michigan. Yes, he lost to Oregon at home a few years ago when Cristobal was there. Yes, he lost to Missouri last year when he was down to the third string quarterback in the bowl game. But he's going to win the games that matter. And I think the other thing that's interesting is this team is just so talented that it might mask any issues that you have. We know about the depth there, especially at the skill positions. Emeka Buka's back at wide receiver. Jeremiah Smith, the number one recruit in the country. Quinshon Judkins in it running back. Travion Henderson in it running back. And obviously they should be able to run the ball better thanks to their new offensive coordinator. That's right, Chip Kelly now calling plays. The defense was elite last year. They bring back a bunch of dudes. They add Caleb Downs from Ohio State or from Alabama, excuse me. Listen, we can nitpick Oregon or Ohio State or Oregon. I can criticize Ryan Day, but this team is too talented not to win a ton of games. They will be in this 12-team college football playoff. I have them as the 5 seed. 6 seed. This is my SEC championship runner-up. And I think it's going to surprise some people. I have the Alabama Crimson Tide as the SEC runners-up. Now, what will be interesting to note, and I should mention this, going to be fascinating to see how the committee chooses to reward or punish teams that go to a conference championship game. Like if Alabama and Ole Miss are neck and neck, or Alabama and Tennessee, or Alabama and Texas, or whoever, and Alabama loses that game, are they going to be punished? I don't think they will be. I don't think the committee wants to set a bad precedent that you're going to be punished for going to conference championship games. So Alabama gets the 6 seed, and the reason why is pretty straightforward. I've talked about this all offseason. Kalen DeBoer, I get that he's coming to the SEC. What can't be denied is 2 things. I think he's one of the 2 or 3 best game day coaches in college football. I know a lot of us haven't watched him for a long time, but name me one time that Kalen DeBoer's team has come out unprepared for a football game. Now, they've lost games because the other team has more talent, most notably Michigan last year. But they don't lose because they're unprepared. He's great schematically. He's great in the Monday through Saturday prep work, or Sunday through Friday, or whatever you want to call it. And here's the other thing. This is the most talented roster that he is ever going to have. A lot of people worried about the schedule. I don't worry as much. Everybody's got some sort of issue, some sort of strengths, some sort of weaknesses. You get Georgia at home in the regular season. You get Tennessee, LSU, Oklahoma on the road. All those teams have first-year quarterbacks, though. And so, yes, you're going to be in tough road environments, but you're going to have more experience. I trust Kalen DeBoer against just about anybody in terms of a head-to-head matchup. I do think if they get to play Georgia in Atlanta, it's hard for me to see them potentially beating Georgia for a second time. Or even if they lose to Georgia, it's hard for me to see them beating Georgia in Atlanta. Do think they're the SEC runners-up. That's my number 6 team. Number 7 team, going to stay in the SEC, and this is the first team that I have that did not make a conference championship game. That's Lane Kiffin and the Ole Miss Rebels. So I am high on Ole Miss this year, like everybody else, and the reasons why are pretty straightforward. The offense is incredible. Jackson Dart is back. By the way, Jackson Dart plus 1,400 to win the Heisman. I don't think those are the craziest odds. I think that's actually pretty good value. But the talent is there on the offensive side of the football. And then defensively, we know that Lane Kiffin went hard in the portal to add players, most notably Walter Nolan, former 5-star, number 1 recruit in the country, played 2 years at Texas A&M, criticized Texas A&M, criticized Jimbo Fisher. This kid was awesome last year, 7.5 TFLs, about 3.5, 4 sacks, basically playing at the nose tackle. Added a couple guys on the edge. And I just like this team. Now, I will say, the schedule is interesting because people keep telling me the schedule is easy. I don't know that I buy it. They play Georgia at home, but Georgia they played last year, and Georgia it wasn't even the same caliber of team. Georgia destroyed them in Athens, and you look at the schedule. While on paper it seems easy, no Texas, no Alabama, no Missouri, no Tennessee. There's a lot of teams that you miss. There are a couple tricky road games. They play at LSU. I'm not high on LSU coming into the year. Sorry to spoil the back half of this top 12. But they have not won in Baton Rouge since 2008. How about this? They play at Arkansas. You know Sam Pittman has beaten them 2 straight times, beaten Lane Kiffin head-to-head twice in Fayetteville. So the bottom line is I think they're going to lose a weird game somewhere that maybe on paper doesn't seem like an obvious loss. I think Georgia's going to be tough even at home. Do think 10-2 is enough to get into the playoff. I have Ole Miss as my number 7 seed. Number 8 seed. So where it starts to get interesting, I do have the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. And I'll be honest, I'm not as high on Notre Dame coming into this season as some others. I see people really, really high on Notre Dame. I don't know that I see it. I was sold the bill of goods on the transfer quarterback last year. Sam Hartman was okay. He wasn't great. This year they have Riley Leonard. 2, the offensive line, which is always a strength, lost a bunch of starters, including Joe Alt, first-round pick of the Los Angeles Chargers with Jim Harbaugh. So we'll see what happens. But the one thing you can't deny with Notre Dame, that schedule, listen, I don't want to call it easy, but that schedule is about as easy as you get in college football. How about this? We all know that they open at Texas A&M, and we all know, thanks to Lincoln Riley, they close at USC. In the middle, here's who they play. Northern Illinois, at Purdue, picked to finish last in an 18-team Big Ten. Miami of Ohio, not Miami of Florida, Miami of Ohio. Louisville at home, Stanford at home, Georgia Tech at home, Navy on a neutral field, Florida State at home, Virginia at home, Army on a neutral field. So I bring it up because in between the really big game to start and the really big game to finish, you have basically one marquee game against Florida State. It's at home, it's off of a bye, and it's in November when it could be pretty cold. I just have trouble finding the losses on this schedule. I don't love the personnel. I have Notre Dame as my number 8 seed. Number 9, this one I think might surprise some people. Okay, so my number 9 seed is the 3rd representative from the Big Ten. It is actually the defending national champion Michigan Wolverines, baby. That's right. Hail to the victors. All right, so really quickly, by the way, as we're recording here, there's a second report that there could be some punishment coming down to Michigan. I don't think it impacts this year's team. Just to be clear, like it would break every NCAA rule. Even if they get a notice of allegations, they don't even have to respond to the notice of allegations for 90 days. So I don't expect anything to happen this year. If something happens, if there's some sort of punishment to Sharon Moore, that changes things. But when I look at this team, I understand they lost a lot, especially on the offensive side of the ball. They still have as good a personnel on defense as just about anybody in college football. Can't say it's better than Georgia. Can't say it's better than one or two other teams. But Michigan does bring back some real talent. Mason Graham on the defensive line is a first-round NFL draft pick. Will Johnson, the cornerback, is a first-round NFL draft pick. Ernest Hausman, linebacker. You go on and on down the list. They got talent everywhere. Big question with Michigan is 2 things. 1, the schedule is very tough. Texas at home in the out-of-conference. USC, remember, is a Big Ten game now to open Big Ten play in Ann Arbor. You have to go to Ohio State, and oh, by the way, Oregon comes to Ann Arbor as well. So how about that? That's 4 teams that are USC's not, but 3 teams that are probably going to start in the top 10. But I would also counter by saying 3 of the 4 are at home. And I don't think there's going to be as big of a drop-off as a lot of people think. I think a lot of the culture from last year is still there, the physicality, the toughness. The big question is what happens at quarterback? Do they go with the ultra-conservative game manager Brock Purdy type and Jack Tuttle, another 7th-year senior? Do they go with Alex Orji, the young guy who's a very talented, high-upside guy? Listen, there's losses on this schedule. It's just too tough. But I think if you get to 10-2, you're going to have a big win somewhere. And I think you're going to get rewarded for playing Texas in the out-of-conference. I think Michigan gets in. They are my number 9 seed. Number 10, team I just mentioned. So, and a team, by the way, that probably a lot of you are sitting there saying, Torres, how have you not mentioned them? I have the Texas Longhorns at number 10. Now, Texas, I'm a little bit more down on than most. I think there's a few factors. Quinn Ewers has been banged up each of the last 2 years. Can he make it through a full season? Is Arch Manning ready if Quinn Ewers goes down? You have the fact that they played a lot of close games in the Big 12 last year. And there's other factors too. Lost 2 top 35 or so type draft picks off the defensive front. Like 2 all-American caliber dudes, Tavondre Sweat, who's with the Tennessee Titans, and Byron Murphy, who got drafted in the first round as well. So you lose those 2, you lose your entire receiver core. And I know Sark has backfilled nicely, but it's not as though they're returning completely intact. Now, the positive is O-line is elite. Quinn Ewers is experienced. You're going to score points. That's what Sark does. And the other positive is this schedule is very manageable by SEC standards, okay? There is no Bama. There is no LSU. There is no Ole Miss. There is no Missouri. There is no Tennessee. There's not even an Auburn, who obviously can be a tough out depending on where you play them. You only play 3 true road games in the SEC, at Vandy and at Arkansas and at A&M. Vandy and Arkansas are 2 of the 3 teams that are picked to finish at the bottom of this league. But I do think there's enough concern from me that I am a little lower. Like I said, I think Michigan could give them trouble because Michigan is just as physical as they are along the front. Oklahoma, it's worth noting. Like, Oklahoma's beating them 6 of the last 8 years. Even last year when Texas made the playoff, they lost to Oklahoma. And I think those Texas A&M and Arkansas environments are going to be really tough. So I think they lose a couple games somewhere. I think the advantage that they have, like I just said with Michigan, they play a big out-of-conference road game. And if it comes down to a 9-3 Texas versus a 9-3 Missouri or a 9-3 Tennessee, they went on the road to play the defending champ. The committee will give them the benefit of the doubt. I have Texas as my number 10 team. Number 11, really quickly, last team in the at-large pool. Little surprising. It's the Clemson Tigers. And again, this is where things are going to get weird because I think Clemson's getting smoked opening weekend by Georgia. But it doesn't matter. If they come back, if they compete in the ACC, they're going to be fine. Couple things on Clemson. Listen, last year was disappointing. They go 9-4. First time, I think, since 2009 or 2010 in that range that they didn't win 10-plus games. But it's worth noting, of the 4 losses, 3 of them came by a touchdown or less. So they were close. They were competitive. Cade Klubnik is back for year 2 with Garrett Riley as the offensive coordinator. That's Lincoln Riley's brother. And you look at the schedule. No Miami. Georgia's in the out of conference, but whatever. And so I think it comes down to Florida State and Clemson for that final playoff spot. And I'm not as high on Florida State as most. I'll explain why in a second. Clemson is at number 11. And then finally, number 12. Remember, 12-team college football playoff, 5 automatic bids. The group of 5, the highest-rated conference champion will get in. Number 12 is the Liberty Flames. Okay, so this was a team last year, won their conference, went to the Fiesta Bowl, did not do well against Oregon. But at the end of the day, credit to this program. Hugh Freeze leaves. In comes Jamie Chadwell. They don't miss a beat. Caden, I'm tripping on the kid's name here. Why am I blanking on the kid's name? Caden, why am I tripping on this kid's name? I feel so bad now. Why am I blanking on this? Caden Salter. I was going to call him Caden Slaughter. Caden Salter. Have the notes right in front of me. 32 touchdown passes last year, 12 rushing touchdowns. They're going to roll through Conference USA. They are my 12 seed. Couple teams that just missed the cut. I just mentioned Florida State. Listen, love what Mike Norvell has done. I just don't believe in DJU. I've lived the DJU experience for 4 years now. 57% completion percentage last year at Oregon State, at Notre Dame, at Miami. I don't like the schedule. They do get Clemson at home. Penn State, listen, I got to see it to believe it. And everyone, by the way, everybody keeps telling me no team is going to benefit more from the expanded playoff than Penn State. I don't buy that. The argument is that in a 12-team playoff era, they would have made it all these different times, 2012, 20 this, 20 that. Like since James Franklin's been there, if there had been a 12-team playoff, they would have been in 4 or 5 times. That's fine. But we have to factor in there was no Oregon, there was no USC, Washington. Whether I personally think Jed Fish kind of was sketchy on how he left Arizona, he's going to get Washington rolling. So I think the road for Penn State is tougher. I know they have the new OC. I'll believe that Drew Aller is a dude that can win big games when I see it. Penn State is out until further notice. Oklahoma State, Mike Gundy said some weird stuff at Big 12 Media Day. The guy wins a lot. They also take a lot of weird losses. They lost to South Alabama last year. They did lose also to Central Florida. I think Oklahoma State's the runner-up in the Big 12. And those are the teams that missed it. By the way, Tennessee, I like. Nico, redshirt freshman, 1 start under his belt. Is he ready to go 10-2 against the schedule that includes at Oklahoma, at Oklahoma, at Georgia, Bama at home, Missouri? I have maybe a few more questions on the defense as some Oklahoma, new offensive line. So that is my 12-team playoff. The number 1 through 4 seeds are Georgia, Oregon, Miami, Utah. 5 through 12, Ohio State, Alabama, Ole Miss, Notre Dame, Michigan, Texas, Clemson, and Liberty. All right, so what I want to do. I want to take a quick break. When I come back, guess what we're going to do? We're going to break down a sort of hypothetical bracket, but we're going to go game by game. I'm going to tell you who I like, who I think ends up winning each individual matchup, and who I think is your ultimate national champion. Bracket breakdown. It's coming next. Quick break. Be right back. Before we do, many of you ask me all the time, Torres, what can I do to help support the show? You give me hours and hours and hours of content every single week. What can I do to help you? Well, I'll tell you what. Do me a quick favor. Check out the Aaron Torres Media merchandise store for all of your team-specific shirts, hats, and more. All available at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. A lot of you wondering, Torres, what can I get in that merch store? Well, first of all, we got our brand new Hope and Pope Kentucky basketball t-shirts. That's right. Mark Pope has arrived. He is here to save the day. Get your Hope and Pope t-shirts there. Also, Arkansas fans, the Big Pig Invasion is here. You can get your tees there. Basketball School Alabama shirts. Mora Hurley 2024 UConn shirts for your tailgates at Rentschler Field, your games at the XL Center or Gamble. And oh, by the way, your Mike effing Woodson gear for Indiana. If you love football, we got you covered too. We got more Dion shirts and hats than we even know what to do with. The freeze warning has hit the plains. Auburn fans, grab your freeze warning tees now. And of course, our new era, new rules shirt applies to Nebraska football and its incredible fan base. We have more coming for the fall, plenty in stock right now. So make sure to check out the Aaron Torres Media merch store at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. And you can always hit me up with any questions. Aaron Torres Podcast Questions @gmail.com. All right, everybody. I'm back. Good to be back. So let's go ahead and break down a bracket. I gave you my top 12. It's time to go game by game, team by team for the YouTube audience. Producer Matt has just put up the bracket. 12-team playoff, the 4 opening round games. Remember, they will be on home campuses. So the first round, 5 through 12, plays on home campuses. And then after that, we go to neutral fields for the semis, the quarters, the semis, and the national championship game. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see in the top left corner, the first one is a doozy. The 8-9 game, as Michigan is going to Notre Dame in this is an iconic college football matchup. This is, when I was a kid, this was the big annual rivalry every year. It was stood the test of time. Lou Holtz, Brady Hoke, Rich Rod, whatever. Now we are back in the playoffs, 9-8 game, Michigan at Notre Dame. Now, in terms of what I expect, a couple things. One, I told you I'm not as high on Notre Dame this year. But first of all, let me even backtrack. What I actually really expect, this is like old school Big Ten, 3 yards in a cloud of dust. What is it? Like the autumn tundra is upon us. I forget the terminology that they use in the NFL Films video, but this is going to be just like smash mouth football. Remember, these games will be in December on home campuses. So if you are not ready to see a blast of hot air coming out of these players' helmets, you don't know what's coming to you. In terms of the game, listen. I said 2 things. I don't believe that Michigan will be as impacted by all of the losses as a lot of people expect, because ultimately their DNA isn't going to change. They're still going to be great on the offensive line. They're still going to be great on the defensive line. Now, in those upper echelon games, like an Alabama game in the SEC or in the college football playoff last year, an Ohio State game, if Ohio State gets better quarterback play, that might be a different deal. But in this game, even in December, I'm not going to be sold on Notre Dame. I look at Notre Dame, like the quarterback, but he's coming off injury, first year in that program. The O-line, I don't think is as good as it's been. And so when I look at Notre Dame, I think there's just enough questions where Michigan does what Michigan does. They go on the road. It's cold. They punch you in the mouth. They smash you in the face. And Michigan comes out with a narrow win. Michigan advances to the quarterfinals. Let's keep it going. Bottom third of that bracket. So that would be the 5-12 game. I guess not a bottom third, a bottom quarter of the bracket. 5-12 game. Liberty at Ohio State. Big game at the shoe. Listen, I'll be quick on this one. I could sit here and lie and spend an hour explaining to you why, Liberty could pull off the upset. Maybe they can, but it's August. And I don't see it on paper, okay? Maybe when we get to that game, Caden Salter, yes, that's the name that I couldn't think of. Maybe he's thrown for 51 touchdowns and rushed for another 22, and they got a chance. I don't see it. Ohio State's got too many guys everywhere. That defense has been so improved under Jim Knowles. Go ahead and give me the Ohio State Buckeyes to advance to the quarterfinals. Top right of the bracket. Texas at Ole Miss, the 10-7 game. This is a game somewhere Pete Carroll will be smiling. His two former play callers going up against each other, Steve Sarkisian, Lane Kiffin. We know their relationship. Lane Kiffin helped get Sark to Alabama. Alabama helped Sark get to Texas. And here we are. In terms of the game, listen, the game will be at Ole Miss. I know that Ole Miss at times isn't always the greatest SEC venue. Lane Kiffin, and by the way, Ole Miss fans, if you see this, don't get mad at me. Lane Kiffin said it himself. But that place will be packed. It'll be rocking. This will be an SEC game. And as I said, I have questions about Texas going on the road in the SEC. I think it's one thing to do it against some of the teams that they've done it against in the past. But all these teams have players. All of them have athletes. The talent gap isn't as big as people think. By the way, Texas, what was their big issue last year? It was the secondary. Do I think it's better? Probably. Do I think it's great? I don't. Do I think there's one man in the world that is built to expose that? It's probably Lane Kiffin with the help of Jackson Dart and some of those wide receivers that he has. So in my hypothetical 12-team playoff in the opening round, Texas at Ole Miss, I have Ole Miss advancing to the Final Eight. Finally, bottom right of that bracket, boy, oh boy, oh boy. You talk about a spicy meatball, but you also talk about how much college football has changed. We got Alabama hosting Clemson in an opening round game. Okay, this used to be the game of the century every year. For 4 straight years, it was the game of the century. It ain't going to be this year, and I'll be honest, Clemson, I think they can get through an ACC schedule. By the way, this is why I think Clemson and Florida State are crazy to want to leave the ACC. The setup of college football is so advantageous for them. I don't think they can compete with Alabama. Alabama's got too many guys, too much depth. The game will be in Tuscaloosa. I think the other note here, this could be the hypothetical type of game where Clemson is really hurt by Dabo's transfer portal stuff. Now, I'm not anti-Dabo as some other people, but when he refuses to take players out of the portal, my big issue is this. It's not about playing Wake Forest or NC State or UNC or Georgia Tech in October. It's you set the standard of being a national championship contender year in and year out. And I don't know, with the depth that you will not have as you lose players from the portal but don't replace them in this 12-team playoff era where you're going to have to win essentially 4 postseason games. Because if you win the conference championship, then you'll obviously get that bye. But you're going to have to win 4 to 5 postseason games to win a national championship against elite competition. This is where I think Dabo is going to get hurt. I think Clemson goes to Alabama. I think Alabama wins convincingly. So our final 8 is now set. And let's start back at the top of the bracket. Oh, this just looks good. My buddy Cole Kublik calls this a helmet game. Michigan against Georgia. Remember, all of these quarterfinal games are on neutral field, so this will not be in Athens. But Michigan at Georgia, this was the game everybody wanted. Georgia's my number one overall seed. We wanted it last year. We got it 3 years ago in the college football playoff, and Georgia smoked them. And I think this is a year where Georgia probably smokes them again. Now, I don't know if Georgia necessarily smokes them per se, but at the same time, at some point, Michigan not having a quarterback is going to catch up with them. At some point, you're going to have to go score for score. I mean, even if you go back to last year in the college football playoff, I mean, they had to put up 30 points to beat Alabama. Alabama was able to move the ball, in the second half, third quarter specifically. And so I just look at that game, and I do think that that would be a tough matchup for Michigan. Go ahead and give me Georgia to advance to the semifinals there. Bottom half of the bracket, Ohio State playing Utah. Again, a neutral site game. And again, how about this? A rematch of a postseason game from a few years ago, the year that Michigan played Georgia in the playoff. We got Utah, Ohio State in a classic Rose Bowl in, I think it was January of 2022. That was the game where, what was his name? CJ Stroud and Jackson Smith-Njigba. Jackson Smith-Njigba had like 347 yards receiving. That was kind of Marvin Harrison's breakout game. I think he had 2 or 3 touchdowns in that game. They are now playing on a neutral field. And then what probably would be considered a little bit of an upset in Vegas, I'm going to take Utah to beat Ohio State. Listen, I've said it. Ryan Day, I think he's a good coach. I do think in big games, he coaches scared. And I do think historically in games against other teams with physicality, not teams that fake physicality, like teams that eat, sleep, and breathe and live and are all about physicality, he has struggled in those games. Lost at home to Oregon a few years ago. 3 straight losses to Michigan. And I look at this game, Utah's going to punch you in the mouth and they're not going to be afraid. Also, keep in mind, I think Cam Rising is just a better quarterback than whoever Ohio State's going to trot out there, probably Will Howard. Maybe that is official by the time you listen to this. And I look at that game, I think Utah's just as tough. I think the quarterback play is better. I know obviously Cam Rising will not have as many weapons as Will Howard will, but give me Utah to advance to the Final Four of the college football playoff. Let's keep it going. Top right part of the bracket. Ole Miss now playing Oregon, neutral site game. Oregon's first appearance in the 12-team playoff. And this is where I think the depth issues concern me with Ole Miss. Bottom line is in this 12-team playoff, listen, I respect what Lane Kiffin is doing. Ole Miss is not an easy place to play. It's an easy place to coach. It's not an easy place to build a contender. And the one thing that Ole Miss has not struggled with, it's just a reality of the job, is getting the bodies that you need to win week after week after week against elite opponents. I mentioned it earlier in the show. When Ole Miss played Georgia last year, Georgia just had so many more bodies. They were just so much more physical. And I think this is the type of game where it catches up with Ole Miss. I think they can do it for a half. They can do it for a quarter. But for 4 straight quarters, I think it's going to look a lot like last year's Ole Miss-Georgia game. I have Oregon advancing to the Final Four. Finally, bottom quarter of the bracket. Miami, the 3 seed. Remember, they are the ACC champion playing the Alabama Crimson Tide. I got Alabama winning that game. And so a couple things. First of all, Alabama is in the middle of the ACC Invitational, opening with Clemson at home, then playing Miami. But this is where I do think, if we're talking about Mario Cristobal as a game day coach, when the other team has equal or better talent, yeah, I'd be worried because I said it a minute ago. I believe it. I think Kalen DeBoer might be one of the 2 or 3 best game day coaches in college football. I don't think anyone would describe Mario Cristobal as that. And I think Alabama schemes its way to a Final Four matchup because I think that the talent is equal. I actually think Alabama has more talent, even though they're the 6th seed. I think Kalen DeBoer is a million times better game day coach, and I have Alabama advancing to the Final Four. So Final Four matchups are set. We got Georgia, Utah on one side. We got Oregon, Alabama on the other side. Let's start with Georgia, Utah. This, again, will be a neutral site game. This is where the dream ends for Utah. Great team, great season, great coach, great culture. Cam Rising, 7th-year senior. You ain't beating Georgia. You could do it against Ohio State because I have questions about Ryan Day. I have 0 questions about Georgia. 0 questions about Georgia big, physical, tough, not afraid. I think in big moments, they love matching up with teams that are supposedly just as big, just as physical as them. I think Georgia, nice draw for them, rolls right to the finals where they will play the winner of Alabama, Oregon. And in an Alabama-Oregon matchup, I think this is where year one of the Kalen DeBoer era comes to an end. Love Kalen DeBoer, love what he's about, love what he's building. I think he's building something special. And maybe not special. It's been special, okay? But I think he's going to maintain the level of specialness in Tuscaloosa. But when I look at this Alabama team, at some point they're going to run into a team just as big, just as physical. And clearly, Dylan Gabriel's the better quarterback between him and Jalen Milroe. He's probably got better weapons when you factor in Evan Stewart is there, some of the other guys they have. And Oregon, again, has NFL bodies on offense and defense. Go ahead and give me Oregon to advance to Georgia in the national championship game. Producer Matt, give me a thumbs up. Can we go either way on this national championship game? Because we entered the show, I was still torn on who I would like in a matchup between Georgia and Oregon in the national championship game. I'm making this pick. There's no turning back. So here's the backstory. My gut has told me Oregon. That it's just their year. A lot of guys coming back. I'm going to pick. I can't pick Georgia Bulldogs, my national champion. And that was sincere, real-time reaction. I went into this not knowing exactly. I'm going to regret it. Oregon's going to win the national championship. I'm going to be annoyed. But I look at Georgia. There's no real weakness with this team. But then also, and this is the important part, they have kind of a chip on their shoulder from last year. This was a team that thought they were good enough to go back-to-back-to-back. First back-to-back-to-back since Tom Amansky's AAU national championship team 1990s. They were good enough. They were the most talented team. They took it out on Florida State. And I think they spend this year taking it out on everybody else. Almost went Oregon there. I already regret it. But Georgia is my 2024-25 national champion. All right. Well, that was fun. I appreciate everybody tuning in. I appreciate everybody's support. And let me tell you, man, I'll say this. I have been anti-12-team playoff because I think you're going to get a lot of teams that look fun on paper, but aren't actually good enough to win it. You know, Ole Miss kind of comes to mind with that, whatever. But I will say, seeing that bracket is pretty freaking cool. Seeing the possibility of Notre Dame and Michigan in a game at Notre Dame with postseason implications, Clemson against Alabama, Texas and Ole Miss, like it's going to be awesome. And so I am really excited. I'm curious to see how this thing all plays out. And I think that's it for today's show. Tell you what, fun episode of the Aaron Torres pod. We're going to have plenty of college football coming up here over the next few weeks in the lead up to the season. But for today, I'm going to get out of here. If you're not subscribed to the show, make sure to do so. Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Music, wherever you listen to podcasts, make sure to subscribe. Also, make sure to rate and review the show. Go ahead and give us a quick 5 stars. Let us know what you like, what you don't like, all that good stuff. Make sure you're following on social media at Aaron_Torres on Twitter, at Aaron Torres Pod on Instagram, Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com, Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com. All for today's show. Appreciate your support. It's time for me to get out of here. Shout out to Torrent Craig. Shout out to Rachel, who hates my voice. Shout out to JJ Reddick. You F-head. Unblock me, bro. I'll be back later this week. We'll have another episode of the Aaron Torres pod. Appreciate y'all. Hope everybody's having a great week. We'll be back soon.